It's no secret that vintage watches have been having a moment on the pop culture runway. Jay-Z's Rolex Daytona, Tiffany stamped Paul Newman, John Mayer's Explorer dial Big Crown Submariner, Tyler the Creator's Cartier Crash, or pretty much all his Cartiers. My name is Alan Bedwell, owner of Foundwell, a vintage curator and design company. In this video, I'm going to give you 4 tips for navigating the complicated and murky world of buying vintage watches, plus 1 pitfall everyone should know. The watch market for both vintage and modern has been on a wild ride over the last 10 years or so, but for the most part, watches bought in the early 2000s and before have become vastly more valuable and coveted. If you're looking for a watch to mark a personal milestone, or if you've been too afraid to jump into the market, this buying guide will help illuminate some things to consider when purchasing a vintage watch. Number 1, figure out what you want. Arguably, this is one of the most difficult questions to answer. I always like to refer to it as a shopping version of the board game Guess Who. Knock down all the suspects you don't like until you have yourself a winner. It's something that really should be the jumping off point before you commence your deep dive. There are a multitude of options to consider. Do you want a sport watch or a dress watch? A bracelet or a leather strap? What case size? What functions and era? The process will be overwhelming and end up leading to a frustrating search, the needle in the haystack. Once you answer those questions though, you'll be in a much better position to start your search. Number 2, condition. Nothing will be more important to a successful purchase than finding a model in the best condition possible. To do that, you'll need to get used to looking closely at watches and at certain elements that make up a wristwatch. There are fundamental components to every watch you should scrutinize closely, from the big ones, the case and the dial, to more detailed forward elements such as the crowns, pushers, hands and inserts. The most important of these are the case and the dial. Let's start with the case and the questions you'll need to ask. Is it heavily worn? Are there any major gouges or deep scratches into the metal? A badly damaged case or heavily worn case will greatly affect the value of the watch and also the enjoyment you'll get from looking at it. Has the back been opened using the wrong tool and has the case back been damaged? Also, is the case over polished? An unpolished case can greatly increase the value and the desirability of the watch. Polishing is considered a kind of alteration as it removes a layer of metal from the watch. So, if the case on an older watch looks brand new, it may have been recut or laser welded. Make sure to ask the seller. The dial on the watch is also key for obvious reasons. Dials carry a lot of value to the watch, and issues with them will greatly affect the desirability of a piece, whether new or old. There are a number of important questions to ask here, the biggest being, is the dial original or has it ever been refinished? Over the course of a watch's life, it may have been repainted after suffering some serious damage, usually caused by exposure to moisture. Ask for high quality images of the dial, or even better, look at it closely with a loupe. Also, make sure the correct handset on the dial is fitted. The best way to check this is to look online at many different examples of the same reference from the same time and compare them. While not a deal breaker, you don't want replaced incorrect handsets that are either too long, too short, or wrong altogether. When the hands contain luminous material, it's important to loupe these and use a UV light to make sure they are original. If you're buying online, make sure to ask these questions. With vintage dials, you should expect some spotting and fading of colour, but keep an eye out for careless watchmakers who may have scratched the dial while servicing the watch. Loss of luminous plots, bad staining, and any irregular anomaly. And make sure to look for the correct signatures in the correct places. Remember that even luxury watch companies, such as Rolex, will replace dials with later service dials that are not correct dials for the period and the case the watch was made. That is, it may be a manufacturer's correct dial, but from the wrong period. This can lower the overall value of the watch. Other elements to check for are correct crowns, pushers, and bezel inserts. It's important to bear in mind a replaced crown will often mean that there's been some trauma experienced to the watch. So, follow up with questions about the movement. Again, Modern watch companies will replace original parts with service ones, so it may be a brand correct crown, but a modern one, which you want to avoid. Bracelets are another piece of the puzzle. If you're buying a watch that has a bracelet, ask if it's the original one. Have any parts been replaced? End links, clasps, deployments, or closures? This is not crucial to the watch value, however, it's all worth noting. Number 3. This leads into quite possibly the most important part of the whole search. Buy the very best example of the watch you want within your budget. If you have, say, a budget of $15,000 to buy your Submariner, you need to be realistic about what you can buy. Don't expect to buy a Rolex Comex Submariner in your $15,000 budget. One of the worst mistakes I see people making is having eyes bigger than their budget. This often translates to buying a really poor example of a more expensive and more rare reference. The old adage of, if it seems too good to be true, it likely is, needs to repeat in the back of your head. Select the reference that falls into your budget and go about finding the best condition example you can. Number 4. Remember, you're buying the seller. As much as you're buying a watch, you're also starting a relationship with the person you're buying the watch from. Will the seller authenticate the watch by running through your checklist of questions? When was the last time it was serviced? How's the condition of the movement? And does the seller offer any form of warranty? My mother, who's also in the vintage and antiques business, always used to like to remind me that once you sell a watch, you are married to it. Anytime it goes wrong, you'll be the first port of call for the new owner. If you have a seller that understands this relationship, you will continue to enjoy and love your watch, even if you jump in the pool forgetting that you're wearing your vintage Patek repeater. Number 5. Box and papers are overrated. This is probably the bane of any seasoned watch dealer. There's a persistent myth that box and papers instantly confer value and authenticity to a watch, and without them, any watch is lesser. This couldn't be any further from the truth. Aside from the simple fact that a really bad watch with original documentation still remains a really bad watch, and fake papers and cards have become a lot more common in recent years. Here's the thing. Watches that are 20 years old or more very rarely have the original box and paperwork. First, back then, there was far less consideration for these accoutrements and their impact on later values. So, people were less inclined to keep them. And second, most get thrown away when people move. You have to realize that you do not wear the box and papers, you wear the watch. Finding an unpolished, single-owner Rolex GMT from the 1970s in exceptional condition without the papers is worth a great deal more than an over-polished one with box and papers that also has replaced hands, bezel insert and bracelet and has passed through 20 dealers. As you can see, there is a lot to learn about collecting vintage watches, and almost every element we've discussed here could spin off into its own video. But these tips should give you a clear roadmap to undertaking a smart and informed search that leads you to the watch of your dreams. Do not be intimidated by the process. Just be sure to do your due diligence, do your research, and most of all, get excited for the venture into the new world of watch ownership. I'm Bedwell for Robb Report, and if you need to get hold of me, you can find me at Foundwell.